Welcome to Supporting English Language Learners in Training. This module will offer guidance and suggestions to those who have English language learners within the context of an IET program. The work within this module is adapted from a training created by Susan Finn Miller, a leader in the English language and adult education fields. Throughout this training, we will reference English language learners. This refers to learners or participants in a training program who are not native speakers of English and may have varying degrees of proficiency in using the English language. Here are the goals of this training. We will first work to identify specific needs of English language learners, which differ from those of native speakers within a training setting. Next, we'll summarize and talk a bit about common challenges that English language learners may face in a training setting. Finally, we'll discuss some effective training techniques for supporting English language learners within a training setting that will help them be as successful as possible. First, let's look a bit more closely at understanding English language learners and how they may experience a typical job training program. The first quote reads, "I am wondering if it is just my program or if it is more widespread. It seems to me that ESL students really struggle with the lecture materials and questions. It saddens me because our program has lost some great people who would have been great nurses but had to drop due to difficulties." This quote is taken from a nursing training program forum on allnurses.com. Let's look at one more post on the same forum to examine further the issue of English language learners facing challenges in a training program. This quote states, "I am not surprised, and I hope the school can do something to help with the communication barriers. I am currently attending a printer technician school in Spanish. I thought my language skills were pretty good, but have found that understanding and understanding are two completely different things. I understand a lot, but when it comes time to explain it, my mind draws a blank, a complete blank. When the native Spanish speakers are keeping up, I am catching up. I hope I can find a support group here or even start one for students studying in a different language. I know I will definitely need it. As for helping ESL students, if you get asked question after question, please be patient." Both this post and the one on the previous slide speak to the real challenges that English language learners face in job training programs, even if they have fairly strong language skills. As we go deeper in this training, we will explore more why facilitator styles and ways of communicating, specialized vocabulary, cultural differences, and ways that trainers ask learners to demonstrate understanding can prove to be especially challenging for English language learners. It is worth noting that although these challenges that English language learners face in training programs are real, they are not impossible to overcome. With some adaptation to existing training programs, there is a lot that can be done to better support English language learners and help them succeed in a job training program. Let's discuss what we mean by English language learners. Some English language learners in training programs may be highly educated and possess professional and advanced degrees prior to entering into a training program in the United States. Others may have come to the United States as children, but still have background education from other countries, as well as the United States. Some still may have been entirely raised and educated in the United States, but speak an additional language or languages at home. Although some English language learners may have experienced limited or interrupted education in their home countries for a variety of reasons. It is worth having a sense of learners' prior educational experience, as learners with limited school experience will need further support, even beyond what is discussed in this training. This graphic illustrates that social language, known as basic interpersonal communication, or BICS among English language learning specialists, is just the tip of the iceberg. This type of language occurs in an informal atmosphere. It encompasses everyday communication. In this type of communication, speakers often share common experiences that provide a context for the language. The context is evident and obvious to the speakers. It is easy to read the other person's comprehension and provide clarification or ask questions because the language deals with familiar topics and special interests. This differs from cognitive and/or academic language communication, the parts of communication indicated below the tip of the iceberg. The language proficiency required to express more complex thought processes or to provide information in many academic areas takes much longer for language learners to develop. This is because the language involves topics that are far less familiar to the learner and are not part of everyday speech. Support for teaching cognitive and academic language include scaffolding, or breaking the learning and language into manageable chunks, visual organizers to support listening and understanding, and cooperative group activities that help the learners process and check their understanding of what they heard. Addressing these additional aspects of cognitive and academic language communication is imperative for English language learners in a training setting, as they will otherwise become discouraged. Without having their specific learning differences addressed and supported, some of these students may feel isolated and unseen in training programs. Similarly, native speaking peers may not understand the additional challenges English language learners experience and unfairly assume or view English language learners as less intelligent. It is important that instructors model curiosity about how non-native speakers may experience a job training program. By modeling this curiosity to all the students within the training program, facilitators create a sense of belonging, inclusion, and connection within their program. Feeling a sense of community and belonging is especially important for English language learners who may not have a sense of community outside the classroom due to the limited amount of time they are living in the United States or other factors. Creating a learning environment that encourages connection and belonging will lead to more willingness to work through challenges as the learners feel supported by both the facilitator and their peers. They will also likely feel more encouraged to stretch themselves academically and take risks in an environment that is centered on belonging and community. Let's discuss some of the second language acquisition basics that will inform how we understand the challenges and needs English language learners might face. 3 aspects of language acquisition that may affect learning and understanding include comprehensible input, interaction, and the role of errors. Comprehensible input is information that learners can understand and access. Trainers need to express themselves comprehensibly to the audience. Comprehensible input might look different for English language learners than native speakers, and we will address this further later in the module. Also, learners must interact with other learners using the target language. Learners refine their understanding and strengthen their language skills through peer interaction. Finally, it's important to note that trainers do not need to correct every error English language learners make. Instead, it is more important to encourage learners to practice the language without the fear of making mistakes. Overcorrecting students may cause them to be more hesitant to speak, impede their ability to develop fluency, and feel less comfortable participating in class. Let's discuss some of the challenges with languages that English language learners in a training context might experience. When it comes to language, we are like fish trying to describe water. This quote reminds us that we are so immersed in language that it is often difficult for us to see what we are doing with it. It is difficult for native speakers to notice the ways in which our language usage is challenging for English language learners because it is something we do so automatically. That said, it is possible to train ourselves to have more awareness about the language we use. Being intentional about the language we use will enable us to make our language more accessible to English language learners in the training setting. Here are some common language features in a training setting that may prove challenging for English language learners. By focusing on these, we can more intentionally use language to better include English language learners in job training. Remember how we previously explained the iceberg and how context in everyday speech provides a frame for understanding language. In a specialized workplace, such as a medical setting, or even an industrial or construction setting, there is specific vocabulary that would not be familiar to individuals outside of that work setting. Each sector contains specialized vocabulary that may not be used in the same way as it is used in everyday speech, which illustrates a further challenge to language learners. English language learners may lack knowledge in the specific American cultural context as well as in the vocabulary, giving the new vocabulary further layers that need to be understood. For example, an English language learner may have little to no experience of the cultural customs surrounding going to the doctor in the United States. This adds additional unfamiliarity to specialized terms that might be used for a learner in a nurse training program. In addition to the challenge of vocabulary, English can be particularly vexing because many words in the language have multiple meanings and can be used as different parts of speech. For example, table can be a noun, a thing in your house to put things on top of or eat at, but it can also be a verb that describes setting something aside for the time being. Interest can be a verb meaning that something draws attention and thought, but it can also be a noun describing additional money accrued on top of a base payment if something is paid off over time on credit. Terms, odd, positive, and many other words function in a similar manner. Idioms are also particularly confusing for those who did not grow up with such expressions. Most idioms do not literally mean the word that comprise them, which is very confusing for language learners who will usually read them or hear them as such. For example, if you say someone is pushing the envelope, it doesn't mean they're moving an envelope at all. You're expressing that they are taking a risk or doing something that may not be particularly safe or within the norms of behavior. Likewise, drawing a blank has nothing to do with artistic creation, but instead means an inability to recall or remember something. All of these other examples in the red, belt tightening, team player, in a nutshell, etc., work in a similar manner. Finally, phrasal verbs are a confusing feature of the language for English language learners to grasp. Phrasal verbs are action words in English that mean a specific thing when a preposition is added to the base verb. To tip someone, for example, means something different than to tip someone off. Similarly, throwing something is not the same as throwing it away. Language learners may not hear the preposition added to the verb as part of the verb, or they may understand the phrasal verb literally. For example, learners may assume that look up something means to literally raise their eyes and look at what is above them or gaze skyward, rather than to search for or locate information in a resource. It would be ideal to use these constructions sparingly in a training setting. That said, it is important that learners come across these constructions eventually, as native speakers do in fact use them. The best way to approach specialized language, multiple meaning words, idioms, and phrasal verbs is to introduce and describe them before using in a specific setting. After students understand the meaning of these words and phrases, you can use them in your training. In addition, there are a number of different general communication challenges that English language learners may face in a job training setting. It may be helpful to avoid whole class discussions, as many learners may be intimidated by this approach. Try pairing English language learners up with classmates or peers for smaller group discussions instead. Those who are newer to the language will need ample opportunity to interact one-on-one or in small groups with native speakers to gain confidence, as well as be able to more easily follow the flow of the conversation. In many other cultures, there is a strong power differential between the instructor and the learner, and learners do not ask questions or even participate much in discussion because of the teacher's assumed role as the main transmitter of knowledge in the classroom. Keep these challenges in mind as we progress through the next slides. Even by avoiding or minimizing some of the language challenges and oral communication challenges we discussed, there are very likely still be times where there are breakdowns in communication. Breakdowns in communication are when you do not understand what someone is saying or someone else does not understand what you are saying. These are normal and natural and would likely happen in a classroom environment that was composed entirely of native speakers as well. It is best to deal with these breakdowns openly and honestly. You might consider talking to the class and letting them know explicitly that sometimes misunderstandings happen and that these misunderstandings can be awkward or embarrassing, but we all can work together to repair the communication and figure out what each other is saying. First, let's take a look at what you as the trainer can do if you don't understand a participant. You may also wish to model these techniques to learners so they know that they can use these strategies to try to repair a lack of understanding of you or other classmates. Begin by apologizing and letting the person know you did not understand what they said so that they know you don't understand. Next, you can try to repeat back the parts you did hear them say. Try saying, "Did you say?" and then repeat what you heard or made out following that. The person can clarify if that is or is not what they said. You might also ask the person to write what they were trying to say if that seems helpful. Finally, repeat again what you heard after further clarification to make sure you understood this time and to check for your understanding. It's also important to discuss how to repair communication from the perspective of someone who is not necessarily an English language learner. It may be that your own language as the trainer may be unclear or confusing to the learners you are working with. If a learner does not understand you, first, try to repeat what you said more slowly and clearly. Enunciate well and speak at a natural but slower pace. You may also want to reflect on the vocabulary you used. Is there a way to repeat what you said using simpler, more commonly used words in English? For example, changing "I was whipping up some food for the client" to "I cooked food for the client." Again, remember some of the kinds of words we mentioned earlier, including idioms and phrasal verbs, may have caused some of the confusion if they were not explicitly taught before. If it seems like it might be helpful, you could also use gestures to mime what you mean or write your statement for visual reference. Following the attempts at clarifying and repairing the communication, it is a good idea to ask the learner to repeat back to you what they heard and understood to confirm that your message was understood this time. We've talked about some common challenges and needs of language learners and why these things affect understanding. We also reviewed some tips for repairing communication when it breaks down in training settings. Now we're going to look at tips and strategies for how to plan trainings to make them as accessible as possible to English language learners. When planning trainings, here are some primary ways to build in more opportunities for English language learners to access and process the material. First, consider using visuals to support understanding of a text, written or oral. This may include pictures, videos, or even gestures to emphasize the idea or concepts you are trying to teach. Next, consider the language you use to discuss the material and give directions. Try to use simple, commonly used vocabulary. Also, if possible, try to use simple sentences and avoid making asides. For example, instead of saying, "Please use gloves. I know you need non-latex ones, Daniel," when or after you are in the room with the client, consider saying, "Enter the room to meet the client. Please use gloves in the room with the client. You can use latex or non-latex gloves." Simpler sentences without complex constructions or asides that instead use direct, commonly used vocabulary are easier to process orally. You may also consider speaking more slowly. Do not speak at an unnaturally slow rate, but consider slowing your speech to around 75 to 80% of the speed you would speak at without thinking. Speaking too slowly can impede comprehension, but speaking slightly slower gives English language learners a bit more time to process oral language. Finally, make sure there is ample opportunity and time for learners to interact with each other. Learners can process materials independently from the instructor and with each other, which helps them think critically and work as a team to understand the topic at hand. Visual support, listening, note-taking guides, hands-on activities, multimedia, and cooperative learning all work to support learners in some of the ways we discussed on the prior slide. Can you think of what some of these might look like in your specific training context? What could you add to your training? Related to increasing interaction among learners and cooperative learning, it is important to think about the ratio of direct instructional talk or lecturing versus the amount of time learners in the training talk. Ask yourself, how much time do learners have to practice training-related talk? If the answer is not very much, how can we think about increasing learner talk? Learners clarify their understanding of material by discussing it with the instructor and their peers, so it is very important to give them ample time to talk, ask questions, and check their understanding of the materials. One way to ensure learner talk is by implementing a 15-minute rule. For every 15 minutes of direct instruction or trainer talk, pause for learners to talk and process the information before continuing on. This helps learners develop speaking confidence and process the information. This gives an opportunity for all learners to build trust and bonds with each other too. Another way to help learners build confidence is to increase learner interaction and engagement with a text. We can do this by using an anticipation guide. An anticipation guide is a set of questions that learners answer independently or in a pair prior to reading or viewing a text or video. Learners build workplace-related skills such as prediction, critical thinking, and compare and contrasting. Learners do the following with an anticipation guide. Before watching the video about taking a patient's blood pressure, 1. Read the statements and decide if the statement is true or false. Talk with one or two partners about your answers. It's okay if your answers are different because you will discuss them. Watch the video and answer the questions again. Identify the evidence for the answers from the video. Then, discuss the questions after with the partner. Did your answers change? Cite the evidence from the video. Learners use the questions on the left before they watch the video. Learners might work with a partner and use communication skills to share background knowledge to inform their predictions. You can pause the module now and answer the before viewing questions if you'd like to try this yourself.
Hi Quinn, it's Patricia, your CNA. I'm here to take your blood pressure.
Cool.
Just gonna clean off the stethoscope before we take your blood pressure. Now we're going to put on the blood pressure cuff, and I'm going to check for your brachial artery. line this up. You can go ahead and set your arm down. Your blood pressure is 112/66. Lift up your arm. Thanks. Set that down. Okay. Do you need anything else before I go?
I'm good.
Okay, thanks.
Things to remember. Use the correct size cuff. Do not take a blood pressure on an arm that has an IV in it. If your patient is lying on their side, choose the arm on the bottom. If that arm has an IV, ask the patient to lie on their back and choose the arm without the IV.
After watching the video, learners will answer the same questions using the right-hand column on the previous slide. Then, learners compare how their answers changed from before and after they watched the video. They can also point to evidence or examples within the video to support how they chose their answer after viewing. Another strategy you might use is think, pair, share. This strategy involves posing an open-ended question with no precise right answer to the learners. You might tailor the question to match common problem-based scenarios that learners might encounter on the job. In a nurse training program, you might describe a situation where a patient is being resistant or difficult, and then ask the learners, if you were in the same situation, what would you do? Why? You then give learners a bit of time to think about on their own what they might do and prepare an answer. They can write down notes if that is helpful to them. Next, pair learners to share their answers to the question of what they would do and discuss. Finally, have the learners come back together as a whole group and share out about what they discussed with their partners. You can encourage and highlight the fact that there is no one right answer here, but that by discussing and working together, we can come up with a variety of ways that might make sense to approach a common work problem and develop strong critical thinking skills. Think, pair, share prompts or questions can be tailored to emphasizing or specifically developing the kind of skills you want your learners to develop on the job. If you want them to compare strategies and develop comparing and contrasting skills, you could ask something like, how might this scenario be similar to the one we talked about earlier? If you are encouraging learners to develop persuasive skills, you might ask that they tell a partner why we or they should make a recommended step. Or if you're trying to get learners to synthesize information and make inferences, you might ask, what can you infer about the client's understanding from their actions? In addition to think, pair, share, and the anticipation guide activities, here's some additional general tips and strategies for working with English language learners. 1, lecture with consistent outlines, visual displays, key vocabulary, and content review. If the structure of the outlines and graphic organizers you give learners is consistent, the learners can focus more on the new content and vocabulary they are learning because they know what to expect with the flow of the outline they're filling out. 2, make lecture notes available before the lesson. By doing this, learners are able to preview new vocabulary and understand where the lecture is going prior to attending. This gives them multiple opportunities and modalities, both reading and listening, for accessing the text. 3, encourage audio or videotaping of lectures. Like the tip before, this increases the ways the learners can access the lecture and gives a chance for them to repeat anything that was confusing during the lecture and process the information at their own pace. 4, reduce the complexity of language, but not the complexity of content on handouts and exams. These learners are new to English, but they're not new to complex ideas. They also need to be able to be critical thinkers on the job, so reduce the difficulty with the language so the learners can focus on doing the critical thinking tasks. 5, provide audio files and handouts and writing of key terms. Again, this gives opportunities for repetition as well as multiple ways of accessing the text and accommodates different learning styles. 6, speak to learners directly to let them know you welcome their questions. This point also serves to help create acknowledgement of all learners and fosters a sense of belonging in the training environment. 7, create context for content through stories. Invite learners to share their unique cultural experiences and perspectives. This, like the previous tip, helps the learners process information and new content in a way that is engaging and accessible to them and fosters a sense of classroom community and belonging. 8, encourage use of translating dictionaries in class and consider allowing them for tests. Allowing learners to use dictionaries and translators is teaching the learners that taking advantage of tools available to them to improve their understanding is a good way to navigate misunderstandings and unfamiliar vocabulary that they might encounter on the job. Finally, here are some general interaction tips for English language learners in a training environment. It's worth noting that English language learners generally just need more processing time. If you expand the wait time when posing questions or beginning discussions in class, you will make the environment more accessible to English language learners. You can even encourage all learners to think quietly for an allotted amount of time before beginning to share, so that native speakers don't initially dominate the conversation since they're able to process the language faster. Embrace the awkward silence after asking a question for a little bit longer than normal. Similarly, you can let learners know you will be calling on them so they have time to prepare a response in case they're called on. Cold calling on a learner can make them nervous if they don't know it's coming. As mentioned before, also pay attention to your language when beginning a class discussion. Avoid slang terms, idioms, or metaphors unless you've already have a prepared explanation for learners of what they mean, or you've pre-taught them before the discussion. Also consider having learners repeat instructions back to you before doing independent work to check for their understanding of what task you want them to do. And finally, make sure training work is not all lectures. Include interactive pair or group work each class so that learners have an opportunity to interact with each other and process new information with their peers. So to recap what we reviewed again, consider using more visual support. Think about the language you use in training sessions. Speak a bit more slowly, but at a natural rate. Consider 75 to 80% speed. And imagine how you might have opportunities for interaction among learners. As we close this training, we hope you feel comfortable and able to meet the needs of English language learning participants in your IET programs. Take a few minutes and ask yourself if you can do the following. Identify the unique needs and attributes of trainees who are English learners. Summarize the challenges faced by English learners. Integrate effective strategies to support English learners to achieve their learning goals. Thank you for your attention and best of luck as you practice implementing the tips and strategies you learned today into your IET programs.